Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome everyone to the Design Innovation for Climate Change panel. This is the first panel in a series of panels that we at Service Futures Lab and London College of Communication and MS Service Design will be conducting over the next year. So we will keep you posted on when the next panel is planned, and we hope that you will be able to join us in that conversation as well. The whole idea about design innovation for climate change is to explore the on-ground situation in Pakistan within the context of recent floods and how design can be a catalyst for change. The aim is to explore the topic at two levels: protecting communities, and also when defining national and international policies. So for example, we're looking at the citizen level, we're looking at the sector level, and we're looking at the policy level within these conversations. From 14 June to October 2022, floods in Pakistan killed around 1,739 people and caused rupees 3.2 trillion, which is $14.9 billion of damage, and 3.3 trillion, which is $15.2 billion of economic losses. The immediate causes of the floods were heavier than the usual monsoon rains and the melting glaciers that followed a severe heat wave, and both of which were linked to climate change. On 25th August, Pakistan declared a state of emergency because of the flooding, in 2022, that is. The flooding was the world's deadliest flood since 2020 South Asian floods, and described as the worst in the country's history. It was also recorded as one of the costliest natural disasters in the world history. The floods affected 33 million people in Pakistan. A BBC report estimated around 10 to 12% of the whole country was flooded. Asian Development Bank, the European Union, United Nations Development Programme, and World Bank estimated economic losses to reach about $15.2 billion, and estimated needs for rehabilitation and reconstruction in a resilient way at least at $16.3 billion. So a study by an international team of climate scientists says that global heating made the flooding up to 50% worse, and future floods are more likely. And we are getting into the rainy season in Pakistan at this very point. The World Bank Group's Country Climate and Development Report for Pakistan released concludes that the country needs fundamental shifts in its development path and policies, requiring substantial investment in people-centric climate adaptation and resilience that will require international support. According to Martin Razor from World Bank, he's the Vice President for South Asia, the recent flooding and humanitarian crisis provide a wake-up call for urgent action to prevent further devastation to the people of Pakistan and its economy due to climate change. He further adds that accelerated climate action can protect the economy from shocks and secure more sustainable and inclusive growth in Pakistan. The CCDR also notes that the combined risk of extreme climate-related events, environmental degradation, and air pollution are projected to reduce Pakistan's GDP by at least 18 to 20% by 2015. This will stall progress on economic development and poverty reduction. According to Hela Chekrobuhu, IFC Regional Vice President for Middle East and Central Asia, Turkey, and Afghanistan and Pakistan, if we want to tackle climate change, we need to prioritize investing in adaptation to help prepare Pakistan for future climate-related calamities, which are growing in frequency and intensity. With the right policy frameworks, Pakistan has the opportunity to attract private investment to build its resilience, particularly in sectors such as water management, agriculture, urban infrastructure, municipal services, and housing. Taking that as a point of departure, we come back to today's session. So today's session on climate change and how can design be a catalyst for climate change is focused on generating a conversation around questions such as, what are the biggest challenges in Pakistan with relation to climate change? Are people actually aware of the issue of climate change in direct relation to what's happening, the catastrophes, especially natural catastrophes that are happening in the country at the moment? We have invited the panelists who are from different diverse fields, policy making, design education, sustainability experts, and people who are on the ground activists about climate change as not only a global issue, but also as a Pakistan issue. So we're going to kick off the session before we start going on to the questions with an introduction round, as I see everyone on my screen. So we're going to start with Yashwanti. You're the first one on my screen. Can you please introduce yourself? And I'm just going to then take names, and please introduce yourselves. Yash?
Hi, everyone. Really nice to have all of you here. I'm Yashwanti. I'm a service designer based in London. I will pass it on to my colleague Yushan now. Thank you.
Anzar?
Hi, everyone. My name's Anzar. I am working at Habib University as the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning. I'm also the founder and the director for Center for Transdisciplinarity, Design and Innovation. And it's lovely to be here.
Philippa?
Hi, my name is Philippa Rose. I'm a UK-based specialist in service design and innovation. I also run my own agency and am an associate with the UK Design Council, and delighted to be here.
Sylvia?
Hello, I'm Sylvia Grimaldi. I'm based at the University of the Arts London at London College of Communication. I'm a reader in service design and collaborative futures, and I'm also a co-founder and co-lead of the Service Futures Lab.
Rabia?
Hello, everybody. I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, and I'm also head of the Department, the School of Integrated Social Sciences at University of Lahore, Pakistan.
Maria? Sorry, you're on mute, Maria?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Good to meet you. I'm the founder and publisher of ADA Magazine, apart from being an architect and a social activist in the Environmental Forum. Currently the chairperson of the Design Sustainability Council from Pakistan, which has just initiated itself as a cell in research and grassroots levels to push our research there. So that's all from my end right now.
Dabir?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Dr Hena Ali, and I'm the co-founder at Concept Loop. At Concept Loop, we are trying to focus to redirect plastic waste and low-value plastic waste from the oceans and landfills into building materials at scale. I'm also an architect. I've been practicing as part of Open Door Design Studio for more than a decade now, and really look forward to the conversations today. Thank you.
Fatma?
Hi, everyone. My name is Fatma Yamin. I'm a disasters and climate change specialist working in Pakistan. Currently, I'm working with WWF on their nature-based solutions project. And I've also worked with the Minister for Climate Change as her communications and research person. Thank you.
Essen?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Hassan, and I'm working as a lecturer of public policy and international relations at University of Lahore. I'm working along with Dr. Rabia Akhtar in School of Integrated Social Sciences. Looking forward to today's session.
Yushwan?
Hey everyone, my name is Xishan Wang. I'm a graduate and design researcher from the University of West London. Glad to see you guys, and if you have any questions about the whole event, just please drop me the message. I'll try to fix it ASAP. Thank you.
Dr. Asif?
Hello, everyone. This is Asif Ami, and I'm assistant professor at School of Integrated Social Sciences. I'm teaching international relations, security, and peace and conflict resolution. And I'm working along with Dr. Rabia. I'm part of her team. and it's lovely to be here.
Zoe.
Hi, my name is Zoe, and I'm this panel's coordinator. So any question, just chat me. Okay, this is me.
Sikandar.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. My name is Sikandar Bizinjo. I am part of Angro Corporation, which is a large diversified conglomerate based in Pakistan. I'm also a social entrepreneur. I'm a co-founder of an organization called Balochistan Youth Action Committee, BYAC. We work primarily in disaster response, along with education, health, and education. And we work in Balochistan province, which is the southwestern province in Pakistan. We work with local young people, so we're excited to be here and excited to hear what everyone has to say.
Thank you, Sikandar. Hassan?
Hi, I'm Hassan. I'm a multidisciplinary designer focusing on service design and UX design. I'm also the CEO and head of design at a human-centered design company called Designist, where we like to work on solutions that have a positive social impact.
Thank you. Tazeen?
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm Tazeen Hussain. I'm an associate professor at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. I teach in the Department of Communication Design, and I also freelance as an actor, which is where I'm joining you today. And really listen to this discussion where we speak about positive directions and positive actions that we can take to mitigate the effect in Pakistan.
Okay, so
Thank
sorry,
you.
Tazeen, you're cutting out a little bit, but I suppose that it's to be expected with the weather conditions and with Wi-Fi issues and all that. But yeah, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to have you all on this panel together. It's kind of a dream for me. So we're going to kick off now with Fatma. I'm going to kind of start with you, and what the question I'm going to be asking is what were the biggest issues during the Pakistan floods from a stakeholder perspective and the government perspective. And then also kind of bringing into this question is that what is the knowledge level regarding these natural catastrophes and its connection with the overall climate change? Because my understanding when we've been working on this specific issue is that at this particular point, people are aware. In the Western side of the world, people are aware of the issue, but they do not feel it's directly connected to them at the moment as much as we'd like it to be more, personalized for them to understand how huge it is. So because you've been working on the ground and you've been also working with the government. So again, coming back to the question, what do you feel are the biggest challenges within this particular space from both the stakeholder perspective, who are the direct affectees, and from the government perspective? You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you for the question, Dr. Hena. So from the government perspective first, climate change is a global event, and there's a lot of understanding and acceptance now of that fact. And the rainfall was unprecedented that happened in 2022. There's no question about that. Like parts of Balochistan were not supposed to receive any monsoon rains. And in Sindh, there were places where the rains, which are not supposed to receive more than maybe 100 millimeters of rain, but they received 1,000 millimeters of rain, right? So, from that perspective, the country was not ready to receive whatever it received from the sky. From the stakeholder perspective, we have this understanding that yes, the rains were more. Very interestingly, women were more aware. Like when I was working on the rapid needs assessment reports, and there were quite a bit of challenges mentioned by the stakeholders, women were aware of the fact that the rainfall is happening a bit more than normal, and it's more severe in terms of how it's coming down. But of course, there was a lot of doubt on that fact because no one had told them that we're going to get a lot of rain. Yes, the institutions were aware, the provinces were aware of the fact that we're going to get above normal rainfall. But if you just look at the words, the language, above normal does not really translate anything. And I tried many times to tap into the fact how much is above normal, but that number did not come out. And despite us trying to get this number as much as possible, it did not come out from the institutions that we were trying to get this information from. So we had actually no idea what above normal would be. Above normal can be anything. And so people were not aware how big of the rainfall was going to be, but everyone at the stakeholder level, even at the direct affectees, you still have to go down to the very foundations of the society, where people are not living in civilized areas. They're living in away from civilized areas. They're living in dry beds in the rivers and places like that. Those people were expecting rainfall. Even if you talk to them right now, they will tell you that Pakistan gets a huge climate event, like a flood event, every 10 years. What climate change has done is reduced the duration of that. So they are aware, for example, in South Punjab, I spoke to them when I was doing my master's thesis, and they said, we are aware of when the flood is about to come because we calculate how much water is going to pass through the bridges and everywhere. And, we try to determine how much rainwater is going to hit. And sometimes even the river departments, the engineers over there are going to talk to the communities in order to get an idea of how much water is going to come through which channel and from where. So even at the direct affectee level, it depends on who you're talking to in terms of how aware they are. These are not the people who are present on they're not on WhatsApp, they're not on Facebook and anywhere. They've been living in those places for the longest period of times, and that's why they are more aware of this. So in terms of stakeholder level, people are aware about climate change. They are aware of the impacts that disasters have on their lives. They are aware that something different is happening now because they can't grow the same vegetables as much as they used to grow before. The crops, everything from rice and, especially rice in Punjab and also in Sindh, they know that the water table is going down. So they know that these impacts are there. Some of them are aware that these changes are taking place. They might not know the science of it, but they know that these changes are happening and they're trying to catch up. What they expect is that the institutions and the government are going to have their back, that they're going to have systems in place that is going to protect them when something like this happens. And this is what they knew that should happen, but did not happen. And, so it's the different level of knowledge, but also the different levels of experience that everyone has as well. There are parts of Pakistan that were affected where the level of experience tells them that no matter what happens, we're not going to be saved by anyone. So for example, River Chenab, whenever it floods, it always floods, at the very highest as well. So the people living in the dry bed in River Chenab, they're called, the village is called Thatta Siala. So they know that nobody's going to come and help them. And it's because whenever there is any relief effort over there, usually what the local governments and the local administration, what they do is they share administration maps, right? That the maps that have the boundaries of each and every district, union council, tehsil, and everything. Those maps are shared with relief agencies to provide relief so that, relief can be directed towards the populations that are affected. And if you look at UN OSHA and every crisis response unit, they do it through mapping, identifying on the geography where the impact has happened and then reaching the people that are impacted. Now, the administration maps of the districts of Muzaffargarh and Multan don't have Thatta Siala on the map. They don't, because it is not on the map. It's in the dry bed and Chenab area. That civilization is not supposed to happen over there. But they are on the revenue maps, which means that they generate revenue out of that village. So the mango exports, come out of that village, and different other products, including wheat, come out of that village. But that village is not a red flag in terms of crisis response on the map or anywhere. So you have this multiple factorial, landscape where there's a labyrinth. If you've ever read Jorge Borges, he talks about labyrinth, where there's a puzzle within a puzzle. And this is how climate change has impacted the stakeholders. That puzzle is something that is still difficult for the institutions to unravel. For the people, they are unraveling it from a completely different perspective, which is the lack of power perspective. So when climate impacts, it impacts in a way that completely, disables any systems that we have. So when you have a system that does not have social welfare at the top of its, service provision priorities, then you have a system that is unable to cope with those disasters and crises that come from climate change. But then again, people also know that there's a difference between climate change and disasters as well. Disasters are not caused by climate change, but they are exacerbated by climate change. This is something that sometimes government institutions don't know as well. And this is something that people don't know as well, as much as, you can. So this is like my...
Yeah, thank you so much, Fatma. I think that's quite interesting where you talk about language and you talk about what's on the papers and what's in reality, and then the gap between these two. Sikandar, I'm going to come to you now, because you've written a report on this as well, and then you work in Balochistan, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear your take on this.
Thank you, Hena. Thank you, Fatma, for the detailed response. I think I couldn't agree more. For everyone, just to lay the context of where we work in the southwestern province in Pakistan. It's called Balochistan. It's bordering Iran on one side, Afghanistan on one side, a very rigid terrain, least developed in terms of all the provinces, but the largest in terms of area. It's almost 8 times that of Switzerland. So it's quite a massive area. But in terms of development, it's the least developed. That's why the challenges start. For example, Fatma was mentioning about floods and how government was giving a rough estimate that the rains would be more than normal. In terms of Balochistan, the floods started very early on. It spread to the rest of the country much later. So our organization, which is comprising of young people, natives of those villages, those lands where we operate, we co-create solutions with them. We empower them, and they in turn help their villages wherever they're based in. So we were hearing about the news of different floods, different rainfalls, heavy rainfall, heavy showers way early on. This was even last Eid. So starting June, we were hearing about heavy showers in some villages, cut off of connections, communication in some villages. I think the problem lies when we all are working in different silos. Even government ministries are working in silos. There's lack of coordinated effort. We started a campaign mid-June of helping people in Balochistan, but nobody was actually taking it serious. Our media, for instance, our government, they were busy in the political circus that the country was going through at that point. So every focus was on the politics that was going on, and no focus was given to the actual floods that were happening in some parts of the country, that is Balochistan at this point. When it started moving further down towards Sindh and eventually towards Punjab, where the catastrophe was perhaps much larger on the scale, that's only when we were actually serious about the floods and relief efforts. I think, Hena, this is the biggest challenge that I see. I see the challenge in a way that it's lack of coordination. It's short-termism in nature. So we're only talking about one monsoon, one flood at a time. Okay, this monsoon happened. Let's do all the relief, do all the rehabilitation. But what's next? When do we start actually talking about climate adaptation? We are beyond, unfortunately, we are way beyond mitigation. IPCC clearly says that we're not going to go for the 2 degrees Celsius mark. It's going to go beyond. What next? Especially communities which are vulnerable, communities like Balochistan, communities that are in the coastal cities. completely vulnerable to climate change, whose, for example, footprint, countries like Pakistan, the footprint is less than even 1%, 0 point something percent of climate change. But we are facing with one of the most vulnerable when it comes to climate change. So when do we actually talk about adaptation? Unfortunately, we have to live with these changes. I'm not downplaying the mitigation role. It stands alone. It's very much there. We need to do this. We need to cut on fossil fuels and we need to work on the mitigation. But at the same time, countries like ours, we need to focus on climate adaptation. And I'm glad that you're doing a design focused roundtable. I think this is what's needed when we talk about adaptation. How do we plan for the future? How do we get ready for these changes to occur every year?
Thank you so much, Sikandar. That was really informative in sense of what's really happening on the ground, and then where exactly are we in terms of opportunities for change. I'm going to pull in Hassan, you at this particular point, because you work with design and you have your own design organization that works on social innovation problems as well. So how do you think we can bring design into this equation to facilitate different processes? For example, a lot of times the word system has popped up, and also about communication, or also about gaps between what is actually on the ground and what the government or the related stakeholders are aware of. So what role can design play, organizations such as yours can play in that?
Hi, thank you for the question. So I think firstly for us, like when you talk about design, like it's beyond, I just want to make clear, like design is not just graphic design or making of things, right? It's about understanding behaviors and then trying to, or understanding any kind of situation and trying to make it better than what it was before. So even just adding to what Sikandar was saying earlier, right? Like mitigation is changing, right? We need to adapt to new futures. Like what does that new future look like? But it's really, really important when you talk about how do you see it from a design lens, it's understanding, what is the current situation right now? What are the challenges? And then from a future thinking lens, what are the possible things that can happen in the future? And then how can us as designers work to get the right stakeholders or the right people in the room to find interventions? And I'm not saying solutions, because as you said in the beginning of this talk, it's like, it's not about solutions anymore. It's like, there's no end to anything. It's about creating interventions, right? In systems design or systems thinking, this about creating interventions that can have a net positive or net negative result. So it's about trying to work towards those positive results and acting beforehand. So just to give you an example, at our house, we have some gatekeepers, we have some staff members, and their houses were completely wiped out in the floods. And they've come back to us saying, hey, can you give us funds to rebuild our houses? And we're like, of course, we can give you funds to rebuild your houses, but is there any point also to rebuild your house in that same location? Because there's a risk of a flood coming again, and you have, I believe that different architectural practices also, I think it's Yasmin, Larry, maybe Dabi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they've created new ways to counter natural disaster. But for me, sometimes that might not be the solution, right? Because you might build a new structure, but if you don't have access to healthcare, access to other facilities, it doesn't matter if your house survives in that flood area. It's about how can we design for larger climate disasters where we even need to move. So I told my staff member, have you even considered maybe moving? So it's about creating conversations in these larger communities, be like, hey, these disasters may continue to happen. So it's about mobilizing these conversations and larger interventions where we might need to actually think more radically on relocation, for specific places. And I think the role design will play is helping facilitate that conversation, help facilitate the interventions that can possibly happen.
Thank you so much, Hassan. I think kind of talking about that, I'm going to bring the conversation to the policy making people. So Hassan, I'm going to start with you. So we've been talking about systems, and we've been talking about, it was such an important point that when we're doing rehabilitation or reconstruction, it's happening in the same place, which still has the danger of being flooded any time flood happens again. So from a policy making perspective, how do you think we can mitigate a situation like this?
Thank you so much, Hannah. So first of all, we all have established that this is not the very first catastrophe that Pakistan has faced. You know, every 2-3 years or 5 years, we have had an earthquake or a flood, you know, or a locust attack or anything of this sort. So I think the main issue is the principle through which the government-sponsored organizations or the non-governmental organizations have been working. The principle is, once there have been a disaster, now let's go and manage that. If we talk about NDMA or PDMS, you know, so once the disaster is there, the issues that pops up, like due to poverty, poor governance, huge lack of technology, ill-informed staff, you know, lack of education within the people to have to deal with the lack of water or diseases, you know, popping up in those areas. So those issues have been there, but, you know, suppressed. Once there is a disaster, the issue starts to, you know, eventually expand to another level. So we need to understand that the whole policy should be oriented towards creating more adaptation before a disaster has affected the area, right? Before it has impacted the different organizations or governmental tiers. So once these floods impacted areas of Sindh or Punjab or KPK, there was no local government officers out there. If there were in some areas, huge lack of resources, no powers delegated. So what happened then? The NGOs with very little resources or people helping on their own came out, then, you know, to save as many people as they could, provide food to the few they could, right? So if we're talking about to managing people at such a huge level, there has to have a policy on, you know, sponsored by the government from national level, right? So this is in principle what I think is one of the biggest issues. So if this would not have been there or will not be there, then we'll face much bigger issues. I'm talking about water security, food security, energy access, which is already a problem within Pakistan, right? So the policy orientation has to be, you know, put in the right direction. So for this, yes, we need a lot, you know, all of the stakeholders to sit down to discuss what needs to be there, you know, and this even goes to another level. If you look at it very closely, the global leadership knew that Pakistan is one of the primary factors of climate change. You know, we are not the ones giving carbon emissions out there, you know, less than 1% as quoted by Sikandar, but yet we are facing the hazards of climate change. But when did you see the aid flowing in Pakistan? After the disaster has been there, after the people were affected. So I think this is in principle what needs to be looked at on the policy level, not only domestically, but also internationally. So this is my opinion on the issue.
Okay, I mean, I think, again, when we talk about policy making, I'm going to bring this to you now, Dr. Asif. Yes, I can see your raised hand as well. Please do add to it. I was just going to ask you to.
Yes, I have some points to add, as Ehsan has mentioned about that the government has in Pakistan or countries who are facing these challenges, the policies are always reactionary. Whenever there is a disaster, then something happens. Then the government activates, and it lacks resources and it lacks infrastructure and everything. And rightly, my colleague was talking, Fatma was talking about the people who are living in most affected areas. There is a responsibility of those people as well. And because I had students who were working in these disastrous areas, especially in the South Punjab, where people were buried in layers of the mud that came with flash floods. And he told me about that the drainage systems which were installed by the government under the bridges or under the motorways or the GT roads, they were clogged. they were blocked or they were removed by the people. Poverty is there, that's why that happened. And the water did not have any drainage, or it did not have any way to go, and disaster happened. So there's a responsibility of people as well. And 2-3 things I would like to add more here. We shouldn't just talk about floods that are coming in Pakistan. There is smoke that is happening in Pakistan and in India in the winters, and that is more dangerous and hazardous. People are, the lifespan is decreasing of the people who are living in those areas, especially look at the Lahore. People who had life expectancy of 65 years, they have lost 2 years automatically when they are facing these challenges. The smoke is an issue. Another thing that is happening, he mentioned about the relocation of the people. When we are talking about the relocation and adjusting people in other areas, we are going to face more challenges, the economic challenges. How are we going to provide them some jobs or everything? The people who are already living there, they're going to face the problems. In the future, we are looking at the sea levels that are rising because of the melting. Oceans are going to rise, and many countries, for example, East Java in Indonesia, we can talk about Maldives. Even until 2050, they're talking about the Mumbai and Shanghai are going to be underwater. Where are we going to relocate those people? Huge crises are going to come in. So when we are talking about policy making at international level, we have to act in terms of not reactionary, but in terms of a policy that has solid ground. And right now, what is happening at international level? Yes, we have COP27, and we are giving funds to these people who are affected, especially look at Pakistan. But giving funds and providing aid, it's just crutches that you're giving to a person who has a broken leg. You have to have something on the ground, a sustainable investment that can help vulnerable countries for the future. And we must have a holistic approach rather than we just look upon floods and the rains that are going to affect, but also the smoke that is also affecting the people are going to, have lots of health issues in the future. Thank you.
Maria?
Thanks, Hena. Thanks, everybody. That was really highly informative, but I would like to take you all back to a bit in the historical perspective. So when the nascent country Pakistan, here we're talking about the early 50s and 60s, there was an intense work on environmental, industrial growth at the expense of environment. There was hardly absolutely any thought or talks as to how we were progressing on the industrial level at the expense of the stakeholders who are marginalized, who are silent witnesses, and who are the actual masters. So as the country grew, the industrial grew, the housing sector grew, and with an extreme end to the environmental sector. And what we are talking today is actually the result of all of that. And we have started talking, conversing, or having a dialogue on the climate change, I think, when the entire world is actually reacting. And we are still debating as to the onus of the responsibilities. We are working in silos, we are working on individual levels as an organization and design practices and independent entrepreneurs. But believe you me, the difference cannot be managed or engaged until it comes down from the top tier, until the government decides, as it decided that, okay, we have to revolutionize the country, we have to pick up the industrial sector, we have to do this much of growth in the economic sector, we have to convert privatization, we have to engage with the housing sector, and so on and so forth. So until that becomes part of the narrative of the government, until there are laws passed, you, me, I, we will still be holding this conversation. We will be trying to do our bits, and we will be as frustrated. So the idea is, I would request this panel that in the next conversation, let's pull up people from the government sector. Because yes, relief, was part of the work of government when we were hit with floods. And floods is not a one-time issue. Climate change is not a one-time issue. As rightly said by Asif, cities are drowning. Karachi is one of the strongest cities, which will be underwater in a span of less than 20 years. And this is a study that has been engaged by the architect Shahid Said Khan, who is not today with us. He would have actually put on some light onto that. And so it is a very scary sector. Half of the Karachi will be underwater. And, you know, we are talking about areas that we are unable to move, yet we are talking also at an urban level, which is a huge specter of Pakistan. If an urban city like Karachi cannot respond to climate change, how do you imagine that people who are living on the sidelines of the peri-urban areas, who are living on the marginalized sector, who are actually not acknowledged by the government, who are actually not acknowledged by the educationists, can respond to this? So, you know, we have to engage with the media also. They are giants. They know exactly what to propagate. Very rightfully mentioned by Fatima that when we were going through the intense flooding and all of that, they were actually talking about the political disarray that we are in, which we are in all the time. So let's put that aside and let's talk about the masses. So apart from all that, we all on an individual level, and I keep repeating this word, individual level will not make us go forward. And I'm really very thankful that you sitting in London, and when we had a conversation in London, that you initiated this. But Pakistan has to stand up and understand that this is just as industries were as important in the 1950s and 60s. Environment is as important for us to make a growth in the economic sector, for us to understand our cities, maybe renegotiate our cities, maybe renegotiate how humanity, cities, and the infrastructure will come together in a span of maybe a decade, less than a decade. So, you know, this is a much wider conversation. I mean, I would like if we can engage with the government, with the media, and who all of us who are here in today's panel, and of course, as audience also, if they can also pull in so as to have a wider, impactful, you know, takeaway from this ongoing conversation. I mean, that's what I would like to have chipped in as we move ahead with the conversation.
Absolutely brilliant. Yes. Sorry, Tazeen, you had your hand up. It's you wanted to say something, and then Fatma will come to you.
Thank you, Hena. I hope I am more audible now.
Yeah, better.
Right. So, you know, I was just listening into what Maria was saying, and rightly so, you know. I think one of the things that we also seem to miss as audience, people who are viewing the floods from a place of the comfort of their houses, right? Living in cities. Cities is where most of your educational institutions are based, and where we are talking about making changes, you know, to policy, or making efforts towards the relief or mitigation of climate change in Pakistan. So one of the major things that is sort of like missing is there's this disjuncture between you know, where we see the images of the floods, the affectees, and in the cities it's more about you know, rain which has come and flooded the infrastructure or something like that. There isn't enough conversation between how these two things are also feeding into each other. So actions being done in the industry or in the infrastructural development of the cities, how they are affecting the rural areas, and how policies or effects or things that are being done in the rural areas, how they are affecting the cities. So that conversation also needs to happen. It's not okay to just look at what's happening in the rural, and not okay to just look at what's happening in the cities, but there is a connect between the two. And that, I think, is very, very important for us to focus on.
Talking about the ecosystems. Fatma, you, and then Rabia.
Thank you. I just wanted to break down like poverty. just a little bit. Just imagine we all have ID card, right? So wherever we go, train stations, banks, everywhere, that ID card entitles you to services. Without even in your home, you can ask for an ambulance. You can ask for services based on that ID card. There are people who can't, because these services are not available to them. They're not available for them in their places where they're living. People live in hazardous conditions or places where disasters are much more, disaster events are much more like common, or they happen, as deadly as they do. It's because they can't live anywhere else, either because of their livelihoods or because of, the inequality in terms of land access and land use. So, for example, between 2012 and till 2015, I'd been traveling all over the country, Gilgit-Baltistan, Chitral, Kashmir, to look at what are these, issues that happen. So in Muzaffarabad, the cost of a piece of land, which is one marla, is about 5 lakh rupees a marla. In a good area where flood or an earthquake would not, affect you as much. So I started climbing Muzaffarabad and going outward and climbing the areas where landslides are much more common. So, I visited a house that had half of the house was gone because there was a huge boulder standing in the middle of the house because it had come down from the, hilltop. And like literally just being in a house and there's this boulder next to you is like, I was sitting there, I was like, I kept glancing at it, like, it's there. It's like, that's how close to a hazard that you can get. And so I asked them what was the price of their land in their place. 10 marlas was for 1 lakh rupees. There's a huge difference in how much land and what kind of safe land is, people have access to. What entitles them, like what services are entitled to them based on their ID card and registrations as citizens. We have populations in Sindh that are not registered as citizens on databases. Those are not recognized that way. So I understand that, mitigation, relocation, poverty, these are all like foundational issues that have to be focused on. But it's much more complex than that. And one of the biggest challenges that, the government faces is the fact that climate change needs to be synchronized at every institutions level, every policy level, every structural level, whether it's the Ministry of Energy or it's the Ministry of Agriculture or Food, any other ministry that thinks that they have nothing to do with climate change, they have to be, on board the climate change policy. We have to understand that the impacts from climate change on the hazards causing extreme disasters has changed so much that there are places around the world, including the United States, where insurance companies are pulling out of disasters insurance because they're losing business. And there are places where as soon as a cyclone strikes, people get text messages that they have received recovery insurance from their insurance companies. And so the next day they can start working on using the money to build their houses again.
Yeah. Sorry,
so,
Fatma.
Yeah.
So just very quickly, Fatma, I think it's very interesting because you're talking about these systems that are already in place and that can support this. And then I would like to bring Rabia in on this conversation because I think she's also very closely connected with policy making and how she's running the program. So I think it would be interesting to get her insight on this as well. Rabia?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope I'm audible. So it has been a really interesting conversation. And I'm here as a student to learn from all of you because you guys have been working on this for much far longer than I've been. So my colleagues, Hassan and Dr. Asif, have made very useful interventions. So at CISPA, we are looking at climate change as a traditional security threat. And until and unless we normalize that conversation and just not look at other traditional security threats minus climate change, we are not going to make much headway. So that's that. Secondly, as you know, if you follow Dr. Adil Najm, I think he has been the biggest proponent of climate change, and he's right in saying that we have moved past climate change. We are already experiencing change, and now we are in the age of adaptation. And for that, exactly what you have brought us all together for: risk management, how do we look at it? Infrastructure enhancement, what can be done? And community resilience, above all, awareness and education. And as somebody who looks at policy, but is also an academic, I believe that we have huge responsibility. You know, everybody here has said that we are working in silos. So probably we can look at, instead of just waiting for the government, you know, that can happen. We have many policies.
I'll come in 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have many policies. We can probably look at a citizen-led national action plan and bring our synergies together and deal with the disconnect that exists. There is absolutely no shared sense of integrated risk management, and that my fellow panelists have already talked about, right? So how can we create that shared sense of integrated risk management? How can we help strengthen, as scientists, as engineers, as academics, strengthen early warning systems? Fatma mentioned, you know, flood risk maps. They, in some areas, need to be developed, right? So how can we get into identifying those? How can we help the National Disaster Management Authority, for example, to improve disaster response capacities? Infrastructure fortification, Hassan has talked about it, resilient buildings, flood damage resistant transportation networks that nobody talks about. You know, all of these things I think are important. And lastly, you know, community engagement and involvement is extremely important. And for that, I think all of us in our individual capacities, if we join hands together, you know, we can raise awareness for effective risk reduction measures. I'd be interested to listen to what others have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabia. That was really useful to know. And I'm going to pull in the designers now, because I think all these questions, especially people who are working in the area of design innovation and sustainability, to kind of talk about a little bit about what could be sustainable practices in this particular situation, and what could be the future of the areas like community resilience, policy making, collaboration within the specific field. I'm going to call out to specific people because I know your areas of research, and ask you a specific question. Just before that, very quickly, Maria. Maria, you'd like to say something? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
So I just wanted to add to Fatima, and you know, the Kuznets curve of the environment has expired for us. And as she says, if we can come together, we would all love to come together. But I just want to highlight one thing. Climate change is just not affecting the rural areas. It is affecting the urban areas. Believe me, what happened to Karachi, you don't want to know. You don't want to know what happened to Phase A, highest elite. I mean, as touted, the most elitist area of Karachi was totally flooded. So it's not just the rural you're talking about now, it's the urban sector also. It's the people, it's the education as mentioned. So I will leave that onto that. I just wanted to highlight the urban, the peri-urban, and the rural.
Definitely, because we're in an ecosystem. So it's all connected, isn't it, at the end of the day? And talking about ecosystem, Philippa, I'm going to come to you now, and also kind of ask a little bit about what are your impressions in a way, or because the terminology, I find it very interesting. We're talking about climate change, but we also kind of talking about that, you know, we're right in the middle of it right now. So we are more into climate adaptation. And you work with innovation strategies, you work with the Design Council, you work with multinationals on developing effective strategies for change, for sustainability, for resilience. So how do you feel that the practice of design innovation can contribute to this field, specifically when it's a multi-sector, huge problem, looking at a country like Pakistan, which has, which needs to get policymakers together with the direct stakeholders, together with designers, together with maybe the private sector. So lots of problems out there. So how do you feel could be a starting point? What could be a starting point in such a messy situation?
Thank you, Hena. I would like to build on something that Hassan said around being proactive, not reactive, and also what Rabia said in terms of we all need to hold hands. And obviously that's easier said than done. But I think it's about mindsets as well as, you know, as well as behaviors, and sort of trying to, in terms of raise awareness and understanding, is about community resilience and building that. So we're thinking about having these conversations around, you know, how this affects, you know, public health, the role of education, in terms of that adaptive action, trying to instigate that kind of adaptive action. And there are definitely it's beneficial to have this kind of whole ecosystem approach, and rather than thinking of climate change and the climate crisis as this sort of single entity. This is pervasive. It affects everything and everyone. There was an interesting project I was reading about use of creative practice around droughts and floods in South Africa. And this was about partly they did a lot of work about elevating underrepresented voices, which is really key in terms of building resilience in diverse communities. And it was about trying to instigate and enhance communication between diverse groups as a sort of paving stone to then instigate like organization and behavior change. And storytelling was a paramount intervention in doing that. So even just starting by facilitating conversations and storytelling, and they also looked at sort of had conversations with people around scientific data on sort of future droughts and floods, and then developed sort of narratives around that to try and raise understanding about potential impacts, but also more importantly, improving readiness, improving preparation. And there was, I think this resulted in a lot of intergenerational conversations, and also from the other side, policymakers being more aware of local issues, because it's, and sort of those national agendas being translated, local and national, I think is really key.
Okay, thank you so much. Hassan?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on one thing. I think one thing that we're really missing out, and when you talk about human-centered design, is the representation of the end users, right? And we're all sitting in this meeting, and there's no representation really from people who are affected by it, right? And I mean, I've been affected by it to a certain degree, and what came to my mind is community, right? And it's about how can we get the community who has been affected, be it urban people, be it rural people, how are they coming together? How can we facilitate those conversations for them to bring solutions or interventions from the ground up, right? So just to give you an example, like I live in Karachi. I don't live in Defense, thank God, but I live in KDA, which is a hill, okay? But even on my hill, I live in a depression on a hill, and we got flooded. And trust me, when it's cloudy today, I get PTSD till today when it rains, because it's actually traumatic, So our neighborhood got together and said that, what can we do as a community, right? And we ended up building our own drainage system to flood it out because the government refused to do anything. So what I'm getting at is, hey, we need to go down on a community level, try to facilitate conversations, co-creation on a ground level, and then get some kind of aid from those people who are already helping out to do it proactively rather than just saying, here's some aid after the disasters happen. I would love to hear Dabir's point of view too.
Dabir, thank you so much, Hassan.
No, Hassan, that was so insightful. And just while I was listening to all these amazing conversations, I think the gap really is that our policies, our approaches often, unfortunately, are very exclusionary. So rather than having everyone inclusive, it's either some bilateral or multilateral, so have a parachute kind of a consultant that comes out and doesn't really understand the on-ground situation. So for something to be understood as a problem-solving tool, the first thing is that you get the research correct, you get the groundwork correct, the basics correct. And if those are flawed, any design solutions by design of it actually will be flawed also. So I think that is something that the inclusionary part has, Hassan has brought up, has really got to come into play. The second thing is that I think the Global South has a lot of lessons for rest of the world to take. There are some great innovations coming from the ground, from Africa, from India. And I think those could be looked at as examples, especially in the academia. Unfortunately, I'm sure Hassan, Anzar, and Tazeen, and so many other people are much more qualified to talk about academia. But I feel that our examples are true north often is stunted. And that's why the kind of examples, the kind of solutions we are thinking of often don't really match to the realities on ground. And then because of that the whole process really gets affected.
Thank you so much. I mean, that is an amazing insight. Tazeen, yes.
To expand upon what Dabir just said. So yes, one of the issues with education is that and we've been speaking about this, that there is a need in Pakistan to understand that climate change is real, and it's not. We are in the adaptive stage right now. I mean, you can't turn back the clock, and there has to be a more cohesive effort from the government to understand that we are in the middle of this crisis. Likewise, education institutions is the same way, right? So education institutions have not really understood the need, the urgent need to address climate change as part of their curriculums. None of the design curriculums address it. We don't have courses around it. Even though HGC has a requirement in the 2020 vision, there is a requirement 0.9 which says that we need to introduce climate change and sustainability as core components of curriculums. Has it really happened? I don't think any of the design schools still now have integrated it into their curriculum, and it can't be a course or an elective, which is the way design schools are structured. That a course or a elective is not going to cut it for you, right? It has to be part of a vision, it has to be part of an integrated effort into each and every component of your course. It needs to be, it needs to flow down that way.
Yeah,
I'll just give you a little example.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in where I teach, we had a redesigned curriculum and redesigned looking at sustainability and recycling as one of the key components. However, since that was something that was built into the infrastructure, it didn't really, seep into the curriculum changes that we were trying to make. And therefore, even though the whole department was restructured and rebuilt with sustainable materials, the important thing was to make the students understand why we invested in a recycling effort rather than a new building or using new materials, why we had made that change. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen institutionally. And that is where I feel we as academics need to now make an effort. Rabia was just speaking about how we could come together as designers or as, citizen-led initiatives. Maybe it's time for academic-led initiatives as well. So at least academics coming together outside the institutional bounds, but making a commitment to courses and things like that.
Rabia?
Yeah, just a two-finger to what Tazeen just said. So there is a push by Higher Education Commission to include Sustainable Development Goals related courses. A huge push where they have asked us to make it mandatory course in our course outlines for all students across the board, irrespective of their discipline. And climate change is just one part of SDGs, but I think it does require to stand on its own as a subject with which we not only engage but also encourage research. So as part of our PhD IA program, I'm advising 2 of the students to work on climate change, but they're doing it in comparison with Turkey. Displacement and migration are huge issues. Which are cross-country issues, regional issues, and these are some things that we also need to look at to expand our research. And I completely agree. Perhaps it's time for academics to take lead and let government do whatever it's doing. And also, as conscious citizens, keep on pushing them on their responsibilities as well.
Thank you, Rabia. Sylvia?
Hi, first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for the intervention so far, and I very much feel the imposter syndrome that you often feel as a designer when you're going into an environment where there's all these stakeholders who know a lot more than you about the topic. And one of the things that I think is connects to both the education conversation as well as kind of the role of design within this is partly we were talking about, getting different stakeholders around the table, working across silos, making sure that voices of different people that might not always be heard might come to the surface, not only as kind of a voice, but also as part of that research process that then will inform what you might design. So really understanding kind of what is important to people, how those communities might integrate certain interventions that we might be able to make, because there is so many examples of design interventions into areas that are very well-meaning. However, they are not grounded in the local context, so therefore they're not sustainable for that particular community. But also, I think, as we're talking about kind of curriculum for designers, I think it's important to also remember that it's not only subject matter, but it's also know-how. And those are the 2 things that we are teaching. It's not only kind of engaging with the subject matter of climate change. It's not only engaging with those aspects, but it's also, are we training those designers to be able to go into a complex situation and facilitate those conversations and have that humility of not posing themselves as the expert of that situation, but posing themselves as the expert of the know-how of doing design, which is a very different thing there. Are we training those students to be able to collaborate without their ego going out of the window and taking over? We have a conception of what design is, which is kind of a superstar designer conception. And I think a lot of those issues that we see come from, people wanting to make a thing that then contributes to that particular area, and that thing has their name on it and they're well known for it. And this is not the type of design that we're talking about. And I think this is a fundamental shift in design education that we need to make. We are here as part of a team to facilitate change to happen. We are not, here to put our name on something that then looks great and makes us look good.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ansar, I saw your hand up, so I'm going to pull you into this because I think it's quite relevant to you. And then Sikandar and then Ehsan.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I actually wanted to respond to quite a few of these points that were being shared earlier. I'll start with higher education, and I'll start with one of the problems that we have been directly trying to address. At Habib University, very young, 9 years old university, one of the things that we are trying to do is to root the whole curriculum, not just 1 course or 2 courses, in the whole idea of what we call reparative futures, that you really need to train everyone. Every citizen needs to have a very good understanding of the world in which they're heading into, and essentially figure out what needs to change. So you can't repair your relationship with the future unless you repair your relationship with the self, with the past, and with everything around you. And what we have been really focused on, and even in the world of design, I see some interesting changes coming. When we use the term, for example, human-centered design, you do tend to destroy a lot of non-human entities around you, which you consider non-human as a part of the process. So I think a better term, which has now emerged, and I hope it becomes more public as well, is planet-centered design. That all of these systems are considered very important as a part of the process. If you look at education, some very interesting things, very sad things, in fact, have happened in the field of higher education. So somewhere around 60s and 70s, that I'm just randomly choosing a point where, let's say, the computer science education was, or the changes in computer science were becoming very obvious. So, and it was very obvious that this world is going to change a lot if the computing world changes the way humans interact with these machines and systems, and they can do work much faster. Around the same time, acid rains were also coming. And so it was also, and the question of ozone was also big enough at the same time. Now, if you look at the curriculum at the school level, college level, university level, what made it as a mandatory part of the curriculum? What made it as a mandatory part of the curriculum was something that is definitely tied to some financial advantage and benefits. So computer science education is there. Everyone is talking about how important and critical it is for everyone, irrespective of their majors, to know the world of computer science, to interact with it, to understand it. However, the work around climate systems, the work around anything around sustainability is mostly divorced to PhD students. You go there, or these powerful people who are trying to work independently on ideas, but as a part of our education curriculum, it's just not there. And it's a huge disservice. I think this is where higher ed, in fact, higher ed is a very interesting place. Most cutting edge ideas happen here, but they're the slowest to adopt them. If you go to a classroom now, and if you sit in a time machine and go 100 years back, it'll look the same. Now, essentially, so if what is it that we have to talk about? So I'm in Australia right now, and I interacted with some people who are dealing with disaster management. Some very interesting things happen. I guess they happen the same way in Pakistan, in a much more less organized way. But as soon as the disaster happens, you have the first response teams. In our case, it's the military. In their case, they have some other specifically designed teams as well. And after that, you have the second response teams that comes up that tries to, after the cleanup has happened, they try to help you with some other important stuff right after that. And then you spend months or years in rebuilding and what happened. So multiple teams do come in. I think in our case as well, it's not just about a flood coming in and we respond to that. It's also important to see where the future is heading towards. If I say 2100, it seems very far away. It's 70 years, it's 77 some years from now. So 1 billion people, one of the research that was conducted in 2017 by one of the German scientists were that around 1 billion people are going to migrate just from this part of the world. And that 1 billion migration isn't going to happen in a span of 10 years or 5 years. I believe it has already started. In many ways, it has started. It has triggered. And if you do not put that in a systems perspective, we are going to fail in going to respond to the needs of these people. So if the climate change maps show that around 30% of this country will remain habitable and the rest would not be habitable, then we really need to understand at what point you stop working on those reparative infrastructure approaches and the fund-based repairs within this region and start thinking about at a much global level. There's another problem with how we think, because we've been forced to think in the ideas of nation states. People also believe that countries are different planets, which they're not. But everyone believes that what happens in Pakistan would not impact someone in a country X. But the planet, we need to understand beyond boundaries whatever is happening. So essentially, some global level conversations are also very important and critical. So everyone has a role to play for sure. And all of those systems that come into place have to play their role. It's very important what we're doing short term, but it's also equally important what we're doing long term. So within the framework of education, as Tazeen was mentioning, that it doesn't have to be a single, it can't be in fact a single course. You have to adopt a very particular ideology or a very particular approach that every single citizen, whether they have access to education or not, becomes supremely aware of the threat the planet is under. And if that understanding is not there, we are going to celebrate a lot of things we shouldn't be celebrating. So in Karachi, they're building a new highway that connects the DHA phase 8, that area directly to where the DHA phase 9 is or Bahria town is. It's a disaster what's happening in that. It's actually going over one of the important riverbeds as well. It's not supposed to be there. And it doesn't happen in any other part of the world. And we do have the EPAs working, but they are absolutely terrible the way they're designed. I think it's one of the worst performing EPAs in the world, perhaps, the way it is structured. So I think one of the very important roles that designers can play is they're good at systems mapping. They're good at mapping not only stakeholders, but they're also good at mapping all these different points as well, and try to see in the universe of these different points, what is it within our capabilities, something that needs to be addressed. So sometimes you zoom in. We call it the butterfly approach, right? You zoom in, you look at the problems that the women are facing, children are facing, immediate problems with education, immediate problem with migrants, but then you zoom out, and that's like a hawk, and you have to start understanding what's happening at a larger scale, and all of us can assume different roles within that. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. And that's so relevant to the discussion we're having around systems design. Sikandar, you wanted to say something, and then we go to Hassan, Asif, and Maria.
Thanks, Hena. Thank you. I'm really enjoying the discussion, Hena. I think this is phenomenal. The level of conversation, the level of panelists that we have, from designers to academia. I'm just humbled to be around you. I couldn't agree more on the points that many of the colleagues have mentioned. Tazeen, Rabia, Anzar, Hassan, Dabir, everyone has mentioned this. I think one solution doesn't fit all. Hassan, the point you're making on the community help, community mobilization, you and I can perhaps make a drainage in front of our house, but not everyone can do. I work with communities in Balochistan that barely have means to have the second meal. They don't even know where it comes from. So how can you mobilize that community to help themselves? It's just unbelievable when you go in the communities there. For example, basic diseases are killing children there. It's unfathomable when you're actually on the ground there. So when I say one solution doesn't fit all, our work during floods was first relief, and then we were focused on rehabilitation as a grassroots organization. So we were exploring all kinds of models in Pakistan. Someone mentioned Yasmin Lari. We even went to her organization as well for a collaboration. But we figured the things that they were using would not be applicable in the villages of Balochistan, because there's a problem of termites. You can't use bamboo there. It has to be something native, something that's coming from that land to be used there in terms of basic and sustainable design. So we're using the stones that are coming from that ground. We're collaborating with this organization called Hands Pakistan, which is one of the largest in terms of philanthropy. And we're collaborating it in Sohbatpur area. So we're adopting a village to make climate resilient houses. But again, these are very minor initiatives from smaller organizations. Even Hands is big. I won't call it small, but again, they're just drops in the ocean. I loved what Anzar mentioned, that we're focused so much on the nation state, so much focused on thinking that a country is just one planet, but it's more beyond. It's not just Balochistan and Punjab and KP. It's not just Pakistan. It's way beyond. Not even global South. It's entire planet, entire Earth is going through the same thing in one way or another. So I think I'd really hope that after this call, there's going to be some concrete actions and concrete roadmap. At least this group can start on. Could be a white paper coming out of here. Could be a collaboration that leads to something, eventually goes to the government or do something together. But really hope that this roundtable is success in that bit. In terms of information, obviously, I'm loving the wealth of information that's coming here.
Thank you so much, Sikandar. And that's one of the ambitions, is to kind of, set up collaborations, get together and do something concrete. I'm going to come to Essa. Yeah, I think I've got the list.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak again. So very insightful points from Dr. Rabia, from Anzar, and Sikandar as well. So what I want to add here is that whenever we talk about interventions, either from policy side or from design side, one have to understand that when it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan is not only facing the crisis of climate only. It is also economy where we're struggling, the cross-border issues, the terrorism, governance issues, and the list goes on. So all of these factors are interconnected. So whenever we talk about intervention, one needs to understand that the indigenous reality has to be taken into consideration whenever we are working on certain policies. But question here is why it is important. It is easy to talk about prepackaged imported solutions to be pushed onto the masses. But at times, and most of the time, it works as buzzwords when we talk about carbon footprints. In actuality, it does not matter to the indigenous communities living within Pakistan and in the peripheries who are the actual effectors of climate change or the other issues. So this is here where I think one needs to understand what the indigenous communities want. And when we talk about, collaborative policy initiative, so here we need to understand that whenever we talk about the stakeholders, it is the only way where there'll be, a much more collaborative understanding and in actuality feel or resonate with that intervention. So I think in this whole scenario, the language is also important. When Dr. Rabia talked about climate change as a national security threat to Pakistan, one must understand why she's saying so. Because in Pakistan, this sort of language is actually very convincing and very pursuing for a lot of people. That is where people understand the gravity of the matter and try to work in a manner which actually makes change. So I think this is the direction which one needs to think about, and also about the indigenous people as well.
Excellent point about indigenous knowledge, indigenous people and practices, because I think that can play a very important role in innovation, which is more effective and sustainable contextually. Dr. Asif.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak again. It's been a fascinating conversation that we've been having, and it's really insightful. I'd just like to add one point here that from this roundtable, what we can, get and what we can take on and we can work on is that we must have to have a bottom-up approach, and with the top-down support. And how I say that, because if we look at the Pakistan, we're talking about policymaking here, and we are talking about indigenous reality and the responsibility of individuals. At the same time, we can come up with something, but we need a support. It can be financial, policymaking, and organizational level, and some sort of, you may say, as we have an organization, SARC in the Global South, which is almost, we can say, non-functional, and there's always something is happening and it's not working as we have seen. ASEAN has become successful in the Southeast Asia. So I would like to give an example of pandemic here. And we saw that how countries had their medical system completely failed. United States had its, the whole medical system failed. So what we can do here, especially climate change, is not only going to affect Pakistan, it's going to affect the whole planet. As Anzar has a background image, there is no planet B. So there's no planet B for anyone here. All are going to suffer from the climate change. So what we can do here is at Global South, climate change is the point where Pakistan and India, who are arch rivals, but they are going to be affected by climate change. They can, at some point talk about it, negotiate, and can cooperate on it. So what would that bring in? That would bring in top-down support to organizations, NGOs, even think tanks who are trying to work on it. And I think we must take from this dialogue, we must have a bottom-up approach with top-down support. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maria?
You're on mute, Maria.
You're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you once again to giving me the space for sharing my thoughts. Sikandar, I hear you and I hear you completely that no two regions have the same answer. And of course, bamboos will not work in Balochistan, but you have plethora of stones. Maybe rammed earth would work. And I'm sure it's not a maybe, it will work. And like I mentioned, Shahid is not with us. He would have educated us all as to, because he's done tremendous studies and he's actually built it in rammed earth. So this is how we engage different processes. And I would like to bring in another thought here. And this is where the designers also come in. I would now like to zoom in from the government, from the stakeholders, from the silent spectators, the masses and all. What role do we play as designers? And here, when I say designers, I would like to use the word architect. I myself am an architect, and I believe there are others in the panelists as well who are architects. Why can't we get out of the syndrome of the star architecture? Because what is now being called, as he said, planet sensitive works, planet sensitive orientations, that requires a very humane architecture. And it's only possible if we reach out to the masses from our studios and engage with the masses. Why is that? Why is the transport system not aligned with the architects also? Why is that highway being conducted from the phase 8 to the phase 9 for a certain group of people, which will benefit again from the silent spectators? So we have to get out of our comfort zone, nutshells, whatever that we have learned and unlearned. We have to now reach out to the masses. So it is a very dynamic situation wherein we have to step out of our zones also now. If we are engaging in such conversations, if we are really wanting to make a difference, if we have conducted studies, if we have interacted with the stakeholders in such minutest level as to see what they had to bear, be it in the rural, peri-urban, urban areas, then this is the time from the academia to the actual professionals that need to come out and engage. And when we are talking about communication and building up a group, then the group has to have the professionals on board who can actually engage and leave aside architecture, that architecture has to make a statement. Architecture has to mediate lives. Architecture has to make life easy. Architecture is for humanity. So we have created this entire profession, which actually was created for the masses, into something as a star blazon, that unless I have this particular building, I am not an architect. And that is exactly what we inculcate to our students also. So why are theses not being conducted on climate change? Why is design, when taught, is not speaking about climate change and to the ground realities? Why we are still making those wondrous, spectrous buildings high on elevations and 3D models, which actually does not resonate with the actual masses? So we have to step out of that zone. We are still within it. Although we are in the climate change, we are in the thick of it. And there's no turning back, absolutely no turning back. So the mindset is where we all have to kind of teach, learn, unlearn. And like I said, I mean, this is a brilliant conversation. Just 2 cents coming from me.
I 100% agree with you, Maria. Dabir, I think we're coming to, because Maria's been talking about materials, and I think you do a lot of work in material sustainability. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And then Fatma, and then Philippa.
Right. No, I think Maria really touched upon really the pain points of architectural profession and education. And I've been practicing for a little more than a decade now. And I think one of the things that, I don't know, what has really come up is that there's a lot of ego when it comes to design, that it really, and that really affects the final product. And what Maria really said was true, that you have a beautiful aesthetic project, but then we have to look at things in a more empathetic manner. And I think across the board, empathy is something that is really required to sustain the life and the planet as we know it. And empathy, like Anja said, is like across the board with the planet, with the people, with the built environment, with the unbuilt environment. So I think that is the problem that we definitely will help solve a lot of things when we come to a more empathetic approach, with which I want to dive into a more pluralistic approach towards things. For example, there are some amazing works being done by Yasmin Lari, Shahid Khan, but I think that these are some of the works to build on towards. I think so the problem and the scale of the problem is so big that we need to have different solutions for different areas, different for the rural ones, different for the urban ones, a little bit just so what our learning really is that we looked at what amazing work Shahid Saab was doing, Yasmin Saiba was doing, but when we looked at around us in Karachi, the trash doesn't go away. No matter what you do, you pay, you dump, and you put into rivers, and you put into landfills, and you pay to get it cleaned, and it just appears magically. So our approach really was, can we look at this thing as a resource rather than a refuse? And that was the kind of conversation that we had internally. And I feel there has to be made more space for different kind of solutions to be tested out. Some of them will not go all the way, but the important part is they might start a lot of conversations. Some of them will actually end by showing other people what not to do. Some of them will be taken up by the other people, other designers, and actually built on it. But I think that space has to be...
Sorry, we've got someone who's got their mic on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but I feel the important thing is that the universities, the academia, the professionals actually have to give this space to people to be able to do this. So I think that's something that I wanted to share. The other thing, I feel that a lot of attention has been given to the materials that we've been talking about in terms of bamboo and the natural materials. However, we have around 40% of Pakistan's population living in urban areas. And the challenges really are, can we actually almost iterate the current situations, the current solutions towards something that works as a hybrid between two extremes, rather than actually going towards one end or going towards the other. So I think that's something that a lot of design thinkers, I'm sure, must have been doing, and I would like to be educated more on by the amazing cohort I'm part of right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dabir. Fatima?
Thank you. This is like, I'm like enjoying myself a lot right now because where the conversation is going. And I love the perspectives given by Philippa and Sylvia on the design aspects. And then Sikandar talked about, you know, very important thing where communities have access to what in terms of like, you know, construction and, you know, access towards mitigation to climate change and everything. But also like Maria and Dabir have talked about a very interesting thing. And I'm going to bring their point and to Anzar's point as well. You know, Anzar and Tazeen were talking about education and, you know, climate change courses and everything. And Anzar's point about the butterfly effect, it's the butterfly approach. It's so important, the point of view, changing the student's point of view. As an academic, I've taught for like 10 years. And in that point, there were two very important aspects that I tried to incorporate in my learning, which was, number one, we need to dilute learning a bit. You know, just teaching students about climate change is not dilution, you know, to that extent. I think students need to also be taught about development, you know, and from development perspective, not the horrible development theories, but, you know, more from like inequality, inclusivity, marginalization. And how does that, you know, what are the vulnerabilities that emanate from there? And these inequalities and marginalizations are not some things that are, you know, material. They stay up here. And how do you bring empathy into that learning? And I think Dabir's point was so important, that empathy needs to be brought into design. It needs to be brought into construction materials. It needs to be brought into learning. And one of the biggest challenges was actually teaching empathy, because you have to kind of, and that ego aspect that everyone was talking about, you have to break the students' privilege in order to make them understand what an underprivilege would mean, or where an underprivileged person is coming from. And so my point was also always to teach vulnerability. I would teach empathy. And that kind of resonated with students more in terms of design, but also in terms of the entire outlook towards what is the difference between community-based and community-led, which gives them more power. And recently, when I'm working on nature-based solutions, one of the biggest questions that I had with the project team was, you know, why are you choosing what? And, you know, so I have this thing where I always have this, my students hated it, which is every time there was an idea or something that was, you know, thrown to me, I would say, so what? Like, why is that so integral, or what makes it or what breaks it? And so one of the things that they were saying, we're going to have to use gray materials for nature-based solutions interventions. And I was like, what? And they were like, well, they're more, stronger and they're long lasting and everything. And I was like, so what? Like, what gives you the justification to compromise on, pure nature-based solutions with a hybrid, with a gray infrastructure? And they said something that was very important, and which is because the people don't trust local materials for sustainability, for longevity, for security. And that's where I had to stop. And when I spoke to the communities themselves, they were like, we can't build this tunnel farming unit with bamboo because we know it's going to break after 5 years. And so we like to build it with a pipe. And I was like, you see, but nature-based solutions, this, and that, but they weren't buying it. And they were so absolutely correct. And this is why whenever I talk to the communities, as soon as I go to them, I'm like, the first thing is, I'm not going to tell you to do organic farming. And they're like happy. And I'm like, the second thing is, you don't need to use local materials all the time, but you need to understand that some things need to be locally led. And so they would have conversations on design, on everything, material used and everything, but it would ultimately come down to sustainability, longevity, and anti-breakage. Like, when we have to repair it, when can we do it? We can't do it in the next 5 years. It has to last 30 years.
It's like more like affordability.
Yeah. And so that aspect was like just so important too, because deconstruction is a very important element of construction. Because unless you can figure out how the deconstruction is going to happen, you can't construct anything. And this is, I use deconstruction as like a very important element in everything, in terms of like diluting spaces. So for example, I really think a lot of focus should be given on public spaces and designing public spaces and public units, then private units and, private spaces. Like I was in Sakhar and we were doing a gender mainstreaming training for a DRR-based project. And one of the biggest the problems was, what are the women-focused spaces in Sakhar, in that village, in that city? Where are they? Like, are there any public spaces there? Sakhar is one of the places that has the highest number of honor killing at that time. This was 2015. So we were like, how do you design gender spaces? That's going to be very difficult in a place that is already controlled by the people. So one of the solutions that we came up with, what about women-headed households? You make a women-focused space in a women-led household, and it will give the space more power and give more voice to the women. Then, just that. So you need to desegmentize the population as well. The clusters are very important to understand. Yes, community is important to understand, but there's a huge difference, because the same village with the same amount of hazards that it faces, with the same amount of disasters, climate change issue that it faces, is almost the same geography-wise, everything. But one village will have 90% literacy amongst women, and one village will have 0%. And so you have to kind of rethink. Like here, I'm working on this project, and this institution is doing great work on how it's approaching the environmental issues. And even good, when it's ticking all the boxes. Are the women included? Yes, they are included. They're sitting in the training. But are the women really included? Were they part of the conversation on the material, on the design? Were they part of the conversation on what disaster means, or the history of disaster itself?
Yeah. I think
I think that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, because then you kind of bring in the principles of social justice and inclusiveness and diversity within this conversation, and also the idea of a publics within public. So there is no one public, but there's different segments, and then we need to kind of map that out before starting any initiative. Philippa, I will come to you and Sylvia, and then we'll start wrapping it up because I have my design team who will be sharing their Miro board with all the insights that they have distilled from this conversation. So Philippa.
Thank you. Fascinating conversations, and I feel like I'm learning so much in this room. I just wanted to build on something around the fact that was mentioned earlier around human-centered design. Yes, this is one of the reasons we could argue that we're kind of in this mess in a way from a starting point, and we should all kind of acknowledge that as, you know, in the design sector. And also we were just talking about trust and empathy, and I think that trust and empathy are absolutely key. I've been working on a project in the largest, one of the largest regions in the UK, and it was about water management and drought and floods. And we did a lot of research with farmers and academics and educators and businesses, and really for farmers, it was more about economy and health, that there were concerns in terms of changing their practices and adapting their practices. They were more motivated by health and economic concerns. So even though we might be talking about climate crisis, sometimes and change needs to happen. The conversations sometimes need to be framed in different ways for different people, because this is all, you know, we're all, you know, they're having this sort of ecosystem level chat. And I would say we need to learn from what works. So really doing research, and there can be there's other parts of the global south and also different localities within Pakistan and neighboring countries that we can learn from. And that's really important. And also we were talking about learning by doing. And Sylvia mentioned earlier around know-how, the know-how and the know-who, as well as the know-what and the know-why. And doing things, you know, with people, not for people. So perhaps, you know, doing some research with local communities, ambassadors, and perhaps trying out some really, really small interventions as experiments, really, really small experiments that we can, you know, prototype and in a very, very small level, and then learn from and share. And the other point was finally just about, bringing everybody together, as we've mentioned in conversation. So people, individuals on the ground, farmers, academics, with policymakers. And I think that's the role for design is not to do the doing, is perhaps to just help bring some of those people together and enable them to have those conversations.
Thank you so much, Philippa. And Sylvia, I would really like you to also comment on the how of things as well within this, because I know you've been leading on projects in similar situations.
I wanted to pick up on, first of all, we have a wonderful parallel chat that is going on, both on the Zoom call and also in WhatsApp, which is great because it's kind of another level of conversation as well. I wanted to pick up on something that was said in the parallel chat, which was that I forgot to say before about participatory design as one of the things that is really important. And I think it's also picking up on what Fatima was saying. So you kind of have community-based projects, and then you have community-led projects. And I think there's also another level which we need to remember, which is often we talk about a sense of ownership. So the community should have a sense of ownership of that project. And I think we need to go a little bit farther than that. And it's not about having a sense of ownership, but it is about who owns it. You know, who's making a profit on this? How is it financed? How is it maintained? Who is the owner of this? And I think this is a conversation that we need to have a little bit more than we have. And I know that there are obviously structures in place that mean that within certain systems, ownership is really difficult to give away. However, from an educator point of view, I think it's something that we can be talking to the students about. For example, we can be talking to the next generations of designers about, which is, you know, it's not only about the ego of the designer, but it's also about those structures of ownership. And how do we give that ownership to the communities, and not just the sense of ownership, not just the leading, but also, you know, this is your thing. And I kind of wanted to plug a paper that we've just written with the lab, which will be at the Service Design conference served as next week. And we really kind of broke down those aspects of how do you build a pedagogy of service design, and how do you work with multiple stakeholders and communities, and how do you maintain ownership, or how do you maintain different ways in which that participation is not a token for us, for our benefit, but it's something that communities are doing for their own benefit, and we are helping with that. So I think it's a good way to reframe that from, participation, community-based, community-led, community-owned might be a good scale to look at in terms of that. And then, Hena, you had asked me something, I can't remember.
I was just kind of pulling in the strand that Fatma was talking about being different stakeholders with different needs and requirements, and mapping that out as an initial step to project design.
Yeah, and I think often that comes from having those conversations a lot earlier, and really working with the community that you have a link with, and understanding not only what their needs are, but also what their desires are, and how do they see themselves within this, and what would be a fundamental project for them, and not just kind of coming in with an idea that we can do this thing in this place for these people, but what is it that you would like to see?
Yeah. So before we hand over to our young design team with the Miro board, is there anything that anyone would like to add? We will have a chance at the end after the Miro board as well. So any concluding comments you can share with us at that point. Yushwan, Yash, can we now look at the Miro board and the kind of insights that we feel have been shared here? In the meantime, while the Miro board is being shared, I just want to thank everyone for being so generous with your time, and being so generous with your insights and the knowledge that you've shared. And I feel this is a great opportunity to get together, collaborate at different levels. It doesn't have to include us all. So you can kind of, get in touch with each other. And if you feel there's some initiatives that can be good within this particular space, for example, adaptation to climate change, that what we've been talking about, I would love to kind of see that happening as well. So so what's happening with the Miro board, guys?
So we'll be starting with Zoe summarizing round one. There was a lot of insights to document on the Miro. We've tried to summarize it as best as we can.
I can see you guys frantically working on the Miro board.
Yeah, we were just like at it the whole time. But there was some very, very interesting, strong points that came up. There
Are
were
you
also
guys sharing it? Because we can't see the board.
Yeah, Yushan, could you share your screen?
Hey, I'm doing that.
Thank you. There were some common themes that came up as well. So you'll see that in big bubbles on the Miro board.
Thank you, Yushua.
Yeah. And,
oh, that's quite filled in. Amazing.
Zoe, would you like to start with round one, please?
Yeah, and guys, please be mindful of time.
Okay, I can quickly share it, and it's super pleasure to hear so many experts for different field discussion these same questions, and we try to summarize some things from the discussion from the round one, and now from round one we learning something about the biggest issue from the Pakistan fraud is not only affect from the rural area, but it's also affect the urban sectors, and now their lack of coordinations. And we also learn amazing government perspective can take in account not only from the international factor, but also the domestic product. And also, we're finding that panelists also emphasize on two things. One thing is short-term effort. It's not planning for the future. So we still need okay. Yushan, would you mind follow me? Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying. You can say.
Yeah, and in the future, but right now we move past the climate change and we're now in the age of adaptations, community resilience and awareness and education. And the second is about the knowledge level in Pakistan. We finding some people who most affected has no access to the service. And now we also finding some people lack of knowledge around the normal account of rain, lack of awareness. This is what we finding the issue from the discussion. And also we finding some amazing gaps from Pakistan, something like a policy master to be original in the right direction before the expected, and the economic and the environmental is as important as grow the economic sectors. And the most important thing for me is like needed to be proactivity, not to reactivities. And the second thing is we must to be, this system is complicated. We needed to be restructured in every level of the government. And then the final things we thought is now we needed to go down on a community level and trying to facilitate the conversation and the creation on the ground things. So this is the thing we're finding from round one. And anyone want to add something for this part?
Anything that anyone would like to add? Okay, let's move. You guys captured it pretty well. Let's move to the next part.
So Zoe's covered the issues and gaps that we discussed in the beginning of the conversation. Then the conversation kind of moved into what we hope to do in the space of education policy and design.
Yash, can you zoom in a little bit because we're not able.
Yes, sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
So the yellow bubbles follow the wish list that we designers hope to intervene in. The blue is for education, green is policy, and the white is all what the action that all of these three sectors would need to take. Community engagement was a big theme and a topic of conversation. Moving from human-centered to planet-centered design, bringing in a systems perspective. These are some of them, so you can go over the rest as well. Not just the know-how, but the know why, who, and what as well. Creating necessary change over design ownership, learning by doing. Then moving into the education space, we're talking about integrating climate awareness into the curriculum on every level, understanding structures of ownership, who owns the solutions that is being brought in. And in terms of policy, we're talking about bottom-up approach and top-down support. That was a great point shared by Asif. Also awareness of local issues, integrating that along with national issues, and the whites are our wish list or directions that all these sectors will have to take. Taking an empathetic approach in design policy and education, and knowing what community-led is, knowing what community-based is, and also what community-owned is. So this was a summary for things that we hope to happen going forward. Yushin, do you want to summarize all the three rounds of discussion that just happened? Thank you so much, everyone. Please add to this if you'd like to say.
Thank you, Yash. And I'm going to process it into Q&A session. We have collected a few of the questions from the audience, and I generalized them into like 3 parts. There are some questions about the environmental problems, and some of them are related to realistic questions, especially people are really interested in the community. What can community do and how to build a community? So we'll discuss about that, and then we have some questions about design education, how to make it sustainable. So firstly, let's see some questions about environment. It's a collected from our audience, and yeah, say the question. Do you think the conflict between India and Pakistan play a role in magnification of crisis along the Ravi River? Anyone have idea about this? We could have a discuss on it. Yes, Maria?
Extremely political question, which can reverberate in many different ways. I would just like to say that the boundaries are blurred now, but yes, it's true that we impact each other's landscape, culture, people. So we have to be mindful. This goes for us and this goes across the border. If people are joining us and listening to us and wherever, because like I said, the boundaries are blurred. If today we are impacted, tomorrow you might be impacted. So, but I would not like to say a definitive yes or no, but we do impact each other's if we are not sensitized enough or empathic enough to understand that what we are doing today might affect lives, and lives matter irrespective where they are situated. So I just wanted to answer it in that context. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that.
And Fatima, you would like to talk about it?
I'd just like to kind of add it a bit differently. Yes, I wouldn't say the conflict, but I would say the political tensions between the two countries, is something that does impact. It's not just the river Ravi, it's also Chenab and others as well. But you can't say that we don't really talk to each other. When it comes to water sharing, for example, how much water is released, when, there's a lot of communication there. Then there is also communication on the climate level as well. Like we're both the countries are part of the 18, important countries in the cyclone warning systems groups. And they're part of other salvation and global, climate groups and weather forecast groups. And so there's a lot of communication that does happen. Over the cyclone, there was a communication that was going on over during the floods, how much water will pass through where. That's also a communication that happens. So you can't say that there's a conflict, because conflict means that we are engaged in active war or active situation. But there is definitely political mindset and ideology does feed into how we talk to each other. I remember that was an issue at COP27 when we were there as well. I won't go into the details, but there's always that aspect. But both the sides are open for communication, but both the sides also realize they're not doing enough. That I can tell you, they both realize that they need to work together in order to make these things happen. And we needed to have more climate cooperation as well. That is something that both of these sides realize. And at COP27, you actually see how much climate ministries want to engage each other. And at the South Asian level, there was a lot of engagement between South Asian countries, and in terms of the climate negotiations that were happening and ministerial climate negotiations, even all the top tables that we were there on, the G77 plus China group, small islands group, everywhere where we were present, we were supporting each other to a point that even very important climate activists and climate, I call myself a climate worker, so I would call them that as well. They were also like highlighting, how each other was saying what we were saying during the negotiations and during the meetings. So yeah, the conflict or the crisis or some sort of a political tension does, seep into this, but there is a lot of attempt to start some deeper level of conversation. on this and climate cooperation. So I'm sure that's going to happen very soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answering. And now we're moving to the next question. Is from a lovely audience. This audience says that I'm currently working on the research proposal focusing on the assessment of hate impacts and adoption strategy of outdoor libraries in Islamabad. In your expectation, do you believe that research questions address a significant knowledge gap in the field? Are there any specific aspects or dimensions related to the hate impact and adoption strategies you would like to suggest? I consider while conducting this research what potential benefits or implications it might have. So it's still a question about climate. So are we willing to discuss about it now?
Hannah, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry.
It's I think it's asking about a research question, which is a huge feedback to have on a research question. So if somebody would like to answer maybe a small aspect within the question, or if anyone would like the question to be repeated. Fatma, do you want to say something? You're on mute as well.
Yeah, I can just try and answer the question very quickly. Sorry, what was the name of the person? Mariam. So Mariam, one of the things that you could do is approach it from a participatory research methodology perspective and see what kind of participatory approaches that you can use. You can use risk mapping. You can use other PRA tools as well. For example, wealth ranking, that will give you an idea of where the how much disparity in terms of income that is there between the laborers as well. And also consider going into key informant interviews, not just not just regular interviews, but more key informing and ethnographic interviewing process that will give you much more idea as to how that impact is happening. Because in terms of heat, you can look at the structural aspects, but there are some non-structural aspects as well that are very important. And then you need to kind of, figure out the dimensions between the both, how there is differentiation, and then maybe go from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatma, for attempting that question.
Thank you. This really answered a really big question. So here also some questions from the audience. So panelists, do you think we can accommodate informal economic into the planning? They often give lift out after the disaster or during the regeneration planning. So what do we think about it? So maybe considering economic influence into the planning, how could we improve the current situation? Is kind of still a big question, but yeah, the audience really want to know.
I think it'd be really good to come from a policymaking perspective, because when we're talking about fundings and we're talking about how can we support such initiatives, what role can policy actually play in it? And then also maybe because people are working, or the panel is working in multi-sectors, so what opportunities are there to support these initiatives or these kind of projects? So can maybe policymakers start here? Asif, I see you on my screen right in front.
I would refer it to Essen because he's an expert on policymaking and he can talk about it first.
Okay, good save.
Could you please repeat the question for me? I'm so sorry.
Yushwan, can you just break it in smaller pieces? It's a long question.
Okay, so how could we accumulate the informal economic into the planning?
Yeah, so when you are planning, what role can policy maybe help play in this?
So whenever we talk about, integrating economic aspect, whenever thinking about, climate change or any other aspect, one needs to understand that economy is the primary thing, I think. This is the primary factor which plays a significant role. Without it, there cannot be anything that can be done, right? So that is why whenever we talk about initiatives to deter the hazards of climate change within Pakistan, there are various policy frameworks, a lot of panelists sitting together, governmental officials. But at the end of the day, what is the implication of that? The implication is reduced or almost nowhere. Why? Because you will shorten funds, resources, human resources, people being trained. For all of these factors, the economy, I think, is playing the primary role, right? So what one can do in order to have that much resources, or to include the aspect of economy when thinking about the solutions or these initiatives. I think that is why I told and I outlined earlier that one needs to understand the indigenous needs of the people. And for that matter, you have to collaborate with the indigenous groups. So I think this is what one can do.
Thank you. Thank you for the answering. And
sorry, wait a second. I'm going to just kind of bring in Sylvia and Philippa on this one as well, because we are all the time looking at financing our projects, and we're trying to find out alternative ways of financing such initiatives. So maybe Philippa, you go first, and then Sylvia very quickly.
Yeah, so often there are obviously in terms of small public grants available, but often businesses have vested interest, perhaps, or like, in terms of like networks, network approach to getting funding together, sometimes collaborations between education institutions, networks of businesses, or with kind of small government subsidies. I think that would be
and also private sector funding as well sometimes.
Yeah,
sponsors, yeah, because I think that happens quite a lot in Pakistan. Sylvia?
I think also the question is about informal economies, and I think one of the things that we kind of do well from a design perspective is taking an asset-based approach. So looking at what there is there already, what is working, how are those relationships, how are those people in relationship to each other from an economic perspective, etc., and then building on that and amplifying that as well. So I think that's not only about kind of pots of money that are coming in from outside, but also taking overall view of what is going on informally within the setting, which requires a lot of research and a lot of conversations within the setting, but definitely can add to that landscape and find opportunities that might not be evident unless you're looking through that.
Thank you.
I would like to add just one point here regarding this. And this public and private partnership is very important as well, because we see economies like Pakistan, where lots of informal business is ongoing, and especially the real estate business right now, where lots of investment is ongoing. So there must be, collaboration and cooperation. The public and private sector must, come together in terms of, climate actions as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yushwan?
Okay, we're still working on the climate questions. Here's the audience says, what kind of resources you have provide technical assessments to the climate projects? Because this person is currently working on one. So do we have any suggestions to this audience?
I would kind of direct this to the design schools, design institutions, and also organizations that are working in sustainability. So Maria, Dabir, Anzar, Tazeen, I think, has left already.
I can just quickly say on that because this is so context sensitive that it's difficult to have a universal tool that's available that tells you that do not go and do not do that. What we have talked about earlier is that there is a huge need to work with the local stakeholders and understand the range of the people that are impacted by that to figure out what interventions are going to work or not. Now, more often than not, we tend to reject the work that has happened in the past by the local communities in trying to address some of these issues. And I think that is something that needs to be questioned, that many of the modern tools and methods that we have that might work in a different setting, when you go into these specific communities, letting go of that hubris and being more empathetic and being more respectful to what has happened before can sometimes be very helpful. If you're talking about, however, material sustainability and assessments, then that's a different question. Many of those can be answered by foundational physics and simple mechanical engineering questions. But in terms of what resources should be coming in terms of agriculture, in terms of changing the food distribution, the health distribution, they are very context sensitive. And I don't know of any universal tool that one looks at to respond to these needs.
But can there be mapping tools that maybe help map out? Yes, Sylvia.
One of the projects that we ran a couple of years ago, which was with families within Camden Council, actually involved the participants in kind of doing an assessment of that intervention and in doing a kind of review afterwards of the impact. And that was really interesting because with a little bit of training on kind of research methods, they were able to gather that information, but also interpret it from their particular point of view and gain new skills in the process. So that was a really interesting model that I think could be kind of elaborated on and used in other.
And it's available. It's available on MS Service Design blog as well. Yes.
Thank you for answering the questions. Next one, we're moving to an individual level. So this audience asks, how could we understand the individual responsibility versus holding companies, governments responsible in the context of emissions, which eventually lead to the climate disaster like floods. So what are the responsibility we could hold ourselves and to the governments?
I think this is a question for everyone. So anyone who'd like to answer it. Maria.
Very loaded question. You know, I was just thinking, what have I done? How did I dispense off my garbage today? You guys put me on the spot. But yes, I mean, it applies to all of us. It applies to all the generations who are listening to us. And we just have to be mindful. We have to unlearn. We have to be sensitive. We have to be empathic. We have to understand that I may be in a certain very comfortable zone. The others may not be. And, you know, Pakistan has very varied, dynamic, and versatile problems that you sitting in London may not be able to comprehend. So, I mean, for many of us, we would be thinking, oh, will the power fail us while we are within the Zoom conference? You would not be thinking that. So hence, we have to be very, very sensitive with the cultural sensibilities and where we are situated, the landscape. And no formula works. Absolutely no formula works. Every space, every person, yes, is indigenous. So I think in whatever small levels or big levels that we can think of and be mindful might work. Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, that's from my side.
Yeah, thank you for your perspective, Maria. Dabir, and then Philippa. And then Hassan, I'm going to bring it to you as well. Because you're on the nexus of design, academia, and industry, both.
Right. I think Maria put a very good perspective on the individual part of the waste generation, and I think when we look at waste generation, it's the affluent class who makes the most waste generation, while those neighborhoods are most cleanest. So essentially, when we throw away our trash, we think that we are got done with it. But it's actually a problem that is in some other part of the city or the world. But I would like to touch on the whole idea of waste generation in terms of the corporate level of the companies, because they are the biggest polluters. Like if we can count on our fingertips, the biggest polluters are the ones who are the biggest consumer, the biggest companies that we have, like the Cokes and Pepsis and things like that. But I think the problem, the answer to the problem has to come from getting them onboarded rather than excluded and having a finger pointing of sorts. So I think now we can doubt their intentions and we can talk about it. However, I think there is a certain wave of fixing of problems and this understanding that has actually started. So I think the companies are the ones who are the major polluters. Now, for example, there's one chips company that has like 15,000 tons of production of only biscuit wrappers that are not going to be recycled or even going into any kind of system. So this is possibly they're going to burn it or just lurking around in the environment. Now, if we do finger pointing, then that won't really help. However, we come out as designers, as solution providers and tell them, hey, we know that's a problem. We can give you a solution that might cost you maybe extra X number of rupees, but this is the value. So I think this has to be more inclusionary kind of approach, and only then we will be able to solve the problem, especially for the bigger companies and the bigger waste producers, essentially.
I was just going to build on that. Really, my point was that I completely agree. I think we're wasting time, and we'll never get a definitive answer when we're trying to hold people to account and do that kind of accounting. And when you get into the kind of systems level thinking and look at every individual choices that you're making and every single product and every single behavior, I think the key point is, rather than focusing on trying to do some sort of accounting on contributions to emissions, we should just focus on that whole point made earlier about joining hands, and that we're all in this together. We're all accountable in every way. So it's about a kind of common mindset in terms of what can we do to play our part in addressing it on every level.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to this, how do you hold individuals responsible? Okay, and I can only let's talk about Pakistan, and I'm going to take floods out of this conversation for this point, right? Like, I was in the north of Pakistan. It's probably one of the most beautiful places, and about 10-15 years ago, there was not that many like plastic wrappers that Dabir was talking about. And I went there recently, like 5-6 years ago, and I tell you, it's getting worse year on year. And everybody who says, oh, it's the tourists that do it, it's the tourists that do it, and I was like, yeah, this must be the tourists who are trashing our country. And I was like, okay, as a designer, I'm not going to jump to conclusions. And me and another team member of mine, we were like, let's follow the trash trail. Like, where is this going, And then when we started following the trash trail, we realized that, it's not the tourists, it's the actual locals living in the area. It's actually the kids. They're going to school, they're coming out of school. That little shop is right there. They're buying the chips packet, they're buying the Terrapack juice box, and they're drinking, eating the chips and throwing around the way. And the way I realized that's happening is when I went off the path. I went to the inside lands and all. And I said, why is trash inside the inside areas? So, and then when you hold individual responsible, they don't have the mindset. They don't know, and at the same time, there was a trash collection drive that happened at the same time. And they got the government to send a trash car, and it came to this remote village of Skardu, Kachura. Anybody knows about Shangri-La, it came to that region, And it was a mullah means a religious leader run initiative. And what was happening is that they got all the government school boys and girls, which was great. to go and start picking up the trash. Then they're all picking up the trash. And when they reached the lake, Upper Kachura Lake, and then they did this big speeches and all. And then I went home, and then on the way back, I see that the trash car that had come empty to Kachura was filled at Kachura Lake, and it was returning empty back to the city. And I was like, where'd the trash go? So they did all of this hoo-ha propaganda, and they just dumped the trash in some corner because there isn't actually waste disposal. There's no system for waste disposal. And when you hold people accountable on an individual level, they're like, what are we supposed to do? And I was like, how are you actually getting rid of the trash? And the people who are actually getting rid of the trash are the ones who are just literally burning it in the winter. They're just like, they're storing it, and they're like, we're using in incinerators in the winter. And then sometimes when you hold people accountable, like even if you take Karachi, for instance, in my office building, the guy will eat the wrapper and he'll just throw it on the ground. And you hold him accountable, and he'll point to the rest of the trash around saying, why aren't you telling anybody else? I'm like, but I'm seeing you and I'm telling you. He's like, but there's nothing you can do about it, so I'm going to do it anyways. So there's this whole mentality around trash throwing is not actually considered wrong. There's no crime, there's no accountability. So even if you hold individuals, there's no way to hold individuals responsible if there's no system holding them responsible, be it a social system or be it a government system. So you're talking about a paradigm shift in mindset to actually make this change happen.
Thank you for sharing.
Sorry for that long rant. That's my take on it.
Thank you for sharing. And I think your answer really links this question from individual level to the communication level. So I got the next question at this level. So to people on the point here, efforts, some disaster happens at the national level, the government do their things, and we have something to do at individual level. So can we do anything about the climate disaster at the community level? So as a community, how could we help with it?
I can say just one thing very quickly that might sound very basic, but what's in your control and within your communities is to increase the plantation as much as possible. They are one of the nature's biggest gift when it comes to really slowing down the water flow and making use of that in different ways. You can't fight the large construction agencies moving around. If you can, great, why not do that? But within your own capacities, you can work on that and also see if the communities can do something around waste. Most communities also suffer because of waste clogging, especially in the urban areas. I guess the population listening to us is mostly also from urban areas. So some of the things that community can most definitely do together is to get rid of the waste that's around them in more responsible ways. You can ask yourself and the communities, what would be the right life cycle of a waste? Where should it go? And secondly, to plant as much as possible. I see, unfortunately, because of the increase in cars, people have been converting even their gardens into extra garages to park more cars. Very sad to see the direction in which it's going.
Yeah, Dabir?
Yeah, I would just like to add, Anzar, so we were designing a house and the client wanted exactly the same thing. And I was just talking to their teenage daughter, and I told them, imagine if you these trees that you are avoiding to plant, Wi-Fi, they would give in Wi-Fi, right? You would not think twice. So just because they give oxygen and clean the air, you're not so excited about them. So this is an unfortunate mindset. I'd just like to connect the answer to Hassan's last comment. I was at the Karachi airport and they had these beautiful bins, new shiny silver bins, and everyone had plastic and very segregated. And then I was just sitting there waiting for my flight, and the guy comes, the cleaning person, and he picks up the cap, and below it was one bag. So essentially, me as an individual, I'm putting it in my segregated trash, but inside it's going into the same trash. And because there is no complete system, so the individual's effort are also literally wasted. But as a community, coming back to that, I think, yes, I think the more important thing is the community, if communities come together and they decide that the easiest thing to do, and this is also financially very viable, that you reduced your consumption. I think the increase in consumption, the consumerism, the capitalist essentially whole idea has been one of the main drivers of waste. The point that sachets are one of the things that are unrecyclable, but their consumption is so high. And without taking names, there was a company that was sued in Sri Lanka because of this, but they managed to work around the legislators. So I think the answer really will come from the individual. As communities will decide to do something, because we also have the power of being the consumer. So if we dictate the way forward, the companies and everyone will follow.
Yeah, so one more question before we close. Yushwan?
Okay, that's the final question is about education. So we've talked about the role community could play in this conversation. So it's about the role of education now. So what kind of role education could play in it, and what is the quality level of floods modeling in Pakistan, considering to the climate change? So to the education people.
I know some of my colleagues have recently worked on GIS mapping of some of these areas. And in fact, her name is Zainab Makiti. I think she recently published something on LinkedIn as well. She shared some of the scholarships of her students have done around that. There is, I would say just one thing, there is a huge opportunity to do research-based courses at an undergrad and grad both level in Pakistan, where most of this information, which is currently missing at larger institutional levels, can be added. So yeah, I think I think it's the most interesting way to make education more relevant as well, where important information, especially contextual information about stakeholders, places, indigenous practices, can be talked about, and then of course which can help creating more opportunities for both mitigation and addressing even post-disaster. So in terms of so I know some courses, I've seen some courses that have gathered some original data and worked with stakeholders in this context.
Awesome. I'm just going to I'll answer the first part. Anzar's answered the second part, but I think the role of education, not just in flood risk mitigation, I think in our country, education across the board, and I'm not just talking about book education. We're talking about understanding your surroundings, understanding the context that you're in, and thinking about values and behaviors attached to the values that you really attach, and I think if that is brought into our education system, in addition to all the hard skills that we're learning, will really expand the mindset of our youth in our country, because we have a large youth and they are frustrated around the world, around the globe. All youth is frustrated. You can see what happened in France recently. And for me, seeing a burning, I was in France and I saw a burnt bus in the middle of the road. And I was like, wow, this happens outside Pakistan. I was shocked. So I think it's, and I've also boiled Pakistani people into one word, really, honestly. It's consideration. Like, you need to be considerate. And a lot of our nation is just inconsiderate. And I think if you take things just purely into consideration on your surroundings and making people a bit more aware of themselves, of their surroundings, I think things can change. And I think that needs to be brought into the education system rather than just memorizing books. They need to understand what they're learning and what they're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. On that note, I think we will close the session for today. I think I'm going to kind of engage with that question as well. And I completely agree with what Hassan said, that consideration, and maybe you can use another word that's more like sensitizing or sensitization around the issues that surround us, and kind of taking ownership of not only our own houses, the inside of our houses, but outside spaces as well. So we just want to share that we will be sharing the recording on our MS Service Design blog, on Service Futures Lab website. We'll share the link to that as well. And also because I think it's being updated, Sylvia, is it? Yeah, yes, we'll share the link to that as well. And we will also share the Miro board with the panelists and to take it forward. We'll decide on what we're going to do with it. But yeah, I think I can see some really interesting ideas popping up there. Thank you to all those who attended. Thank you so much to the panelists for being generous with your time. It was a long panel, but really appreciate it and looking forward to the next session. We will keep you posted through our social media and our blogs, and also our LinkedIn profiles on the upcoming events. Have a lovely day and a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anna. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.